A millionaire went to his poor cleaning lady's house to fire her for not cleaning the bathroom, but was paralyzed when he saw identical twins to him. When he decided to investigate, he had a discovery that would change the whole course of his life. Watch until the end to understand the outcome of this beautiful story. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel, don't forget to like this video, and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. Alexander Morgan's Maserati Quattroporte purred to a stop in front of a modest house in the outskirts of Boston. The contrast between his vehicle and the weathered facade before him couldn't have been more striking. Peeling, paint, overgrown weeds in what was supposed to be a garden, and a rusty mailbox tilting precariously to one side, everything about this place screamed of financial struggle. He glanced at his platinum watch, a habit more than a necessity. Time had always been money for him, and today was no exception. The CEO of Morgan Enterprises hadn't built his fortune by being lenient with underperforming employees. Victoria, his housekeeper for the past 7 years, had been slipping lately. The master bathroom in his mansion hadn't been properly cleaned for weeks, and such negligence was unacceptable. The autumn wind rustled through the trees as he stepped out of his car, his Italian leather shoes crunching on the gravel driveway. Several neighbors peeked through their curtains. It wasn't every day that a luxury vehicle graced their humble street. Alexander straightened his custom-tailored suit and approached the front door with the same purposeful stride that had earned him respect in countless boardrooms. He pressed the doorbell, noting its broken state as he had to knock instead. The sound of children's laughter filtered through the thin walls, followed by hurried footsteps. The door opened, revealing Victoria, her usually neat uniform replaced by worn jeans and a faded sweater. The surprise in her eyes quickly transformed into something else: fear. "Mr. Morgan," she exclaimed, instinctively stepping forward to block the doorway. I wasn't expecting you." Before Alexander could state his purpose, a paper airplane soared past Victoria's shoulder, followed by the thundering steps of children. 2 identical boys around 7 years old chased after their toy, momentarily visible in the narrow hallway behind her. Alexander's carefully prepared speech evaporated. His heart seemed to stop, then restart with painful intensity. Those faces, he knew those faces. He saw them every morning in his mirror, albeit decades younger. The same sharp cheekbones, the distinctive arch of the eyebrows, even the way they tilted their heads while examining their fallen paper airplane. Victoria's face drained of color as she watched his reaction. She knew. She had always known, and the realization hit Alexander like a physical blow. His legs felt weak, his mind racing with impossible calculations. 7 years as his housekeeper, but these boys, they were the perfect age to align with. Something else, something from before. "Victoria," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk." "Please," she replied, her voice trembling but firm. "You need to leave." Alexander Morgan, the man who had orchestrated billion-dollar deals without blinking, found himself speechless. The carefully constructed world he had built, where everything operated according to his plans and whims, was crumbling around him. In its place, questions multiplied like fractals, each answer spawning more mysteries. "Those boys," he started again, "are none of your concern." Victoria cut him off, her protective instinct overriding her usual deference. "Please, Mr. Morgan, just go." The boys had disappeared deeper into the house, their laughter still echoing faintly. Alexander's trained eye caught glimpses of their life through the partially open door, homework spread across a coffee table, superhero posters on the walls, a collection of model airplanes hanging from the ceiling. A normal childhood, worlds apart from the luxury he had surrounded himself with. He took a step back, not because Victoria had asked, but because he needed space to think, to breathe, to process. The woman who cleaned his mansion's 17 bathrooms, who quietly organized his vast wardrobe, who had been nothing more than a reliable service provider in his mind, suddenly held the key to what felt like a cosmic joke at his expense. "This isn't over," he said, not as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact. Victoria's response was to close the door, gently but firmly. Alexander stood there, staring at the worn wood, his reflection distorted in the clouded glass panel. Behind him, his expensive car sat like an alien spacecraft in this working-class neighborhood. But for the first time in decades, all his wealth felt meaningless. He returned to his vehicle, his movements mechanical. The leather seat that had always felt like a throne now seemed to mock him with its luxury. Through the tinted windows, he watched Victoria's house, knowing that inside were two boys who shared his DNA, a fact he was as certain of as he was of his own name. The following week passed in a blur of distraction for Alexander. Board meetings that usually commanded his full attention now felt like background noise. His mind constantly wandered back to those two faces, mirror images of his childhood self. The mysterious circumstances surrounding their existence consumed his thoughts, leading him to make an unprecedented decision. He would investigate discreetly. Sarah Chen, his trusted personal assistant for the past decade, noticed the change in him immediately. The usually decisive CEO now spent hours staring at his computer screen, personally diving into old company records. When she brought him his usual afternoon espresso, she found him surrounded by personnel files from years ago. "Sarah," he called. Out as she turned to leave, "What do we know about Victoria Henderson's employment history?" The assistant's perfectly manicured fingers flew across her tablet. She joined the household staff 7 years ago through Maxwell Staffing Services. Excellent references, perfect attendance record, no complaints until recently. Alexander leaned forward. "Before that, I need everything from before." Sarah's efficiency was legendary within Morgan Enterprises. Within hours, she had compiled a comprehensive timeline. Victoria Henderson had indeed crossed paths with Alexander years before becoming his housekeeper, but in a completely different context. She had worked as a temporary receptionist for 3 months at one of his subsidiary companies, Meridian Solutions. The discovery sent Alexander diving deeper into the archives. He found security footage from that period, carefully preserved in the company's digital vaults. There they were, only 2 brief interactions captured on camera, one in the lobby, where she had directed him to a meeting room, another during a staff gathering, where they had exchanged no more than a few professional words. Nothing. Nothing that could explain the existence of those boys. His investigation led him to Victoria's previous employment records, medical history, as far as was legally accessible, and social connections. One detail caught his attention. Shortly after leaving Meridian Solutions, she had participated in a medical study sponsored by the Avalon Foundation, a non-profit organization that funded experimental fertility treatments. Alexander's pulse quickened as he dug into the foundation's background. The organization appeared legitimate on the surface, but something about its structure nagged at his instincts. He had built his empire by recognizing patterns, and something here felt oddly familiar. Late one night, as the city lights twinkled beyond his office windows, he finally made the connection. The Avalon Foundation was connected to Biotech Dynamics, a company he had acquired years ago during his expansion into medical research. The foundation operated as a subsidiary, several layers removed from public view. His own company. The fertility study had been conducted under his corporate umbrella. But the real shock came when he discovered the source of the genetic material used in the study. During a routine executive health screening years ago, he had signed a stack of forms, including one that authorized the use of biological samples for advanced medical research. He remembered dismissing it as standard legal procedure. That signature had unknowingly made him a donor to the fertility program. The revelation left him reeling. He had unknowingly fathered children through a program his own company had funded. The irony was almost too perfect. The man who prided himself on controlling every aspect of his business empire had been completely unaware of this most personal connection. Alexander spent the next few days in a state of internal turmoil. His initial instinct to assert control, to march back to Victoria's house and demand answers, warred with a growing sense of responsibility. These weren't numbers on a spreadsheet or assets to be managed. These were children, his children, who had lived 7 years without knowing their true father. One morning, He found himself parked a block away from their school, watching from a distance as the boys played during recess. Their laughter carried across the playground, and he noticed how one always waited for the other before starting any game. Twins, supporting each other instinctively, unaware of the powerful man watching them with a heart full of unfamiliar emotions. The cold, calculating business titan was experiencing something entirely new: vulnerability. For the first time in his adult life, Alexander Morgan wasn't sure what to do next. The usual strategies of hostile takeovers and leveraged buyouts wouldn't work here. This situation required something he had never been good at: human connection. Alexander Morgan had never been a man to leave things to chance. Intuition might have served him well in business, but this situation required concrete proof. He hired the most discreet private laboratory in Boston, explaining that he needed a DNA test performed with the utmost confidentiality. The real challenge would be obtaining the samples from the twins. The opportunity presented itself during a carefully orchestrated visit to his mansion. He had Sarah arrange for Victoria to bring the boys along during her next cleaning day, citing a new company policy about family transparency. The invitation came with the promise of using his indoor pool, a luxury no child could resist. Victoria arrived that Saturday morning, tension visible in every line of her face. The twins, however, were ecstatic. Their eyes widened at the sight of the Olympic-sized pool, visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. Alexander watched from his home office as they splashed in the water, their joyful shouts echoing through the mansion's marble halls. "They're natural swimmers," he commented when Victoria brought him his afternoon coffee. She paused, her hand trembling slightly as she set down the cup. "They take lessons at the community center. It's their favorite activity." "Just like me at their age," Alexander said softly, noting how Victoria's shoulders stiffened at his words. After the boys finished swimming, they used the guest bathroom to shower and change. Alexander had prepared for this moment, placing new brushes and combs in the bathroom. As expected, the twins used them, leaving behind the DNA samples he needed. The next week felt like the longest of Alexander's life. He threw himself into work, trying to distract himself from the anticipation. The results would either confirm his suspicions or force him to question his own sanity. Either outcome would change everything. When the envelope finally arrived, Alexander dismissed his entire staff for the day. He needed complete privacy for this moment. The laboratory's report was clinical and precise: 99.98% probability of paternity. The scientific confirmation of what his eyes had told him that first day at Victoria's door. The magnitude of the situation hit him with full force. He had two sons, two living, breathing extensions of himself who had been right under his nose for 7 years. The irony was almost painful. He, who prided himself on knowing every detail of his business empire, had been completely blind to the existence of his own children. That evening, he stood in front of the massive windows of his penthouse office, watching the sun set over Boston's skyline. The city lights began to twinkle, each one representing a life, a story, a family. Somewhere out there, in a modest house with peeling paint, were two boys who shared his blood but not his name. The DNA test results lay on his desk, the clinical language spelling out an undeniable truth. But it also raised more questions than it answered. Why had Victoria never told him? How had his genetic material ended up in a fertility program? And most importantly, what was he going to do now? Alexander Morgan had built his reputation on being decisive, on knowing exactly what moves to make in any situation. But this wasn't a hostile takeover or a merger negotiation. This was about family, a concept that had been foreign to him since losing his parents at a young age. He picked up his phone several times that evening, composing and deleting messages to Victoria. What could he say? "I had your children. DNA tested without your knowledge," hardly seemed like a good conversation starter. Yet the truth would come out eventually. It had to. The boys deserved to know their heritage, their true identity. They deserved access to the opportunities his wealth could provide, the best education, the finest healthcare, all the advantages he had fought so hard to acquire. But he also recognized that barging into their lives with this information could shatter the peaceful existence they had known. Victoria had created a stable, loving environment for them. Despite her modest means, the twins were happy, well-adjusted children. Alexander had seen that during their visit to his mansion. They had each other, they had their mother's devotion, and they had never known they were missing anything. As night fell over Boston, Alexander made a decision. He would approach this situation not as the ruthless businessman he was known to be, but as someone who had just discovered the most precious asset of all, family. The strategy would require patience, something he had never been good at. But, for the first time in his life, the goal wasn't to win or to dominate. It was to become worthy of being part of these children's lives. The autumn rain pattered against the windows of Victoria's small house as Alexander stood on her porch, the DNA test results tucked inside his coat pocket. He had chosen a Sunday afternoon, knowing the boys would be at their weekly chess club, another detail he had learned during his investigation. Victoria opened the door, unsurprised to see him this time. Perhaps she had been expecting this moment ever since his first visit. She wordlessly stepped aside, allowing him to enter her home for the first time. The living room was modest but warm, filled with evidence of a happy childhood, homework, papers scattered on a small table, a shelf full of library books and countless drawings pinned to the walls. Model airplanes hung from the ceiling, each one carefully assembled and painted. Alexander recognized them as the same models he had built at their age. "You know why I'm here," he said, breaking the silence. Victoria sank into a worn armchair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "You did a DNA test, didn't you?" He pulled out the envelope and placed it on the coffee table between them. It lay there like a bomb waiting to explode, its contents already known to both of them. "I deserve answers, Victoria. Those boys, they're mine, aren't they? Not just according to this test, but you've known all along." Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "What I know is that they're my sons. I've raised them alone for 7 years, worked multiple jobs to provide for them, been there for every fever, every nightmare, every triumph. But you used my genetic material," Alexander pressed, trying to keep his voice calm. "How? Why?" The story that emerged was not what he had expected. After being laid off from Meridian Solutions, Victoria had hit rock bottom. No job, no prospects, and a deep loneliness that threatened to consume her. A friend had told her about the Avalon Foundation's fertility program, which offered free treatments to women in financial distress. "I never knew the donor's identity," Victoria explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "The foundation guaranteed anonymity. All I knew was that the donor was highly educated, athletic, and had an excellent medical history. I was desperate for something to live for, something to love." Alexander paced the small room, processing her words. "But when you came to work for me, you must have recognized the resemblance as they grew older." Victoria nodded slowly. "At first I thought it was just a coincidence, but by their 5th birthday the similarities were undeniable. That's why I applied for the housekeeper position. I needed to know more about you, to understand what traits my boys might inherit." The revelation stunned him. For 7 years, she had worked in his home, watching him, learning about him, all while keeping this enormous secret. The twins had been just down the street from their biological father, yet worlds apart. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, his carefully maintained composure cracking. "Look at your life, Mr. Morgan." Victoria gestured around her modest home. "Look at mine. What good could come from disrupting their world with this truth? They're happy, healthy, and loved. I've made sure they never felt the absence of a father." Alexander sat heavily on the couch, his legs no longer able to support him. She was right. He had witnessed their happiness firsthand. But now that he knew the truth, could he simply walk away? "They deserve to know their heritage," he argued. "They deserve the opportunities I can provide." Victoria's expression hardened. "They deserve to maintain their innocence, their normal childhood. Money isn't everything, Mr. Morgan. You of all people should know that." The statement hit him like a physical blow. He had spent his entire adult life accumulating wealth, building an empire, believing that success could be measured in dollars and cents. But sitting in this humble living room, surrounded by the evidence of a loving family, he began to question everything he had ever valued. "I want to be part of their lives," he said finally, his voice softer than she had ever heard. Not to disrupt or to take over, but to know them, to protect them, to maybe learn from them. Victoria studied him for a long moment, seeing something different in his expression. The usual corporate mask had slipped, revealing a vulnerability she had never witnessed during her years of working for him. "It's not that simple," she sighed. "You can't just walk into their lives and announce you're their father. They're children, not a company you can acquire." The rain outside had intensified, drumming against the windows like an accompaniment to their tense conversation. In the distance, thunder rolled across the sky, a reminder of the storm brewing in both their lives. The mahogany-paneled conference room at Blackwood & Associates law firm felt suffocating, despite its generous proportions. Alexander sat at one end of the long table, his legal team assembled around him like a protective barrier. Victoria occupied the opposite end, accompanied by a single attorney from a community legal aid office. The contrast between their respective legal representations mirrored the disparity in their lives. "Mr. Morgan is seeking joint custody," his lead attorney announced, sliding documents across the polished table. "Given the DNA evidence and his considerable resources, we believe this arrangement would be in the children's best interest." Victoria's lawyer, a young woman with determined eyes, didn't touch the papers. "My client has solely raised these children for 7 years. Mr. Morgan's biological connection, while recently discovered, doesn't automatically grant him parental rights." The negotiations stretched for hours. Alexander watched as his high-powered attorneys, who had won him countless corporate battles, struggled against the simple but powerful argument of maternal devotion. Victoria remained surprisingly calm, her quiet dignity more compelling than any legal argument. "The boys have a routine, a stable life," she explained during her testimony. "They attend the local school where they have friends. They're involved in community activities. Disrupting their lives now could be traumatic." Alexander's legal team countered with promises of private education, enhanced opportunities, and financial security. They presented a comprehensive plan for transitioning the twins into their client's world of privilege. Yet with each proposal, Victoria's resistance grew stronger. "Money isn't what they need," she insisted. "They need consistency, normalcy, the freedom to be children without the weight of suddenly being heirs to a fortune." The court-appointed child psychologist's evaluation dealt another blow to Alexander's case. Dr. Eleanor Martinez's report emphasized the potential psychological impact of suddenly introducing a new parental figure and dramatically changing the children's environment. "The twins exhibit strong emotional stability in their current situation," Dr. Martinez testified. "While Mr. Morgan's desire to be involved in their lives is understandable, any changes should be gradual and carefully managed." Alexander found himself increasingly frustrated, not with Victoria or the legal system, but with his own approach. He had tackled this situation like a corporate acquisition, throwing money and legal power at it. Yet here he sat, watching his usual tactics fail against the simple truth of a mother's love and protection. During a break in proceedings, he stood by the window, watching Boston's financial district sparkle in the distance. His empire was visible from here, the Morgan Tower rising proudly among its peers, yet for the first time its significance felt hollow. "Mr. Morgan," Victoria's voice interrupted his thoughts. She had approached quietly, leaving her lawyer deep in discussion with the mediator. "Victoria," he acknowledged, turning to face her. The afternoon sun caught the silver strands in her hair, earned through years of hard work and worry. "Why are you doing this?" she asked simply. "Is it about control? About your legacy?" The question struck him speechless. In all the legal maneuvering, no one had asked him to examine his true motivations. He had pursued this case with the same determination he applied to business deals. But why? "I see myself in them," he finally admitted. not just physically, but in the way they think, the way they approach problems. When I watch them build those model airplanes, solve puzzles or work together, I see what I could have been if I'd had a brother, if I'd had love, Victoria finished softly. Alexander nodded, the simple word capturing what had been missing from his strategic approach. He had been fighting for custody rights when he should have been earning the right to be part of their lives. The court documents, he said slowly, they focus on what I can provide materially, but that's not really what this is about, is it? Victoria shook her head. The boys don't need another authority figure in their lives. They need someone who can show them that success isn't just about wealth or power. Someone who understands that love isn't a legal right. It's earned through patience, understanding, and respect. The words settled over him like a revelation. He had been approaching this all wrong, trying to force his way into their lives through legal channels, when he should have been proving himself worthy of being their father. What if we start over? He suggested, his voice carrying a new note of humility. No more lawyers, no more court battles, just a chance to know them, to learn how to be what they need. Victoria studied him carefully, perhaps seeing for the first time a glimpse of the man her sons might one day need in their lives. The afternoon sun continued to shine through the windows, casting long shadows across the conference room where millions of dollars in legal strategy lay forgotten on the table. The transformation of Alexander Morgan began quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. He started by dismissing his legal team, a decision that shocked the Boston business community. Rumors circulated about his uncharacteristic behavior, but for once he didn't care about public perception. Instead, he focused on learning everything he could about his sons, not through private investigators or legal depositions, but through careful observation and genuine interest. He discovered that Marcus, older by 7 minutes, had an uncanny talent for mathematics, while Michael possessed an artistic streak that manifested in elaborate drawings of future buildings. Victoria had agreed to let him attend their school events, sitting quietly in the back during their science fair presentation. The twins had created a complex project about wind energy, complete with a working miniature turbine. Their enthusiasm as they explained their research reminded him of his own childhood passion for innovation. They did all the work themselves, Victoria told him afterward, a note of pride in her voice. Stayed up late every night for weeks testing different blade designs. Alexander recognized the determination in their approach, the same drive that had helped him build his company. But unlike him, they had each other, supporting and encouraging one another through every setback and breakthrough. He began making small, thoughtful gestures. When the boys mentioned their interest in astronomy during a school presentation, a new telescope mysteriously appeared in the school's science lab. When their chess club needed sponsorship for a tournament, an anonymous donation covered all expenses. The wooden chess set they use, he mentioned to Victoria one day, it's exactly like the one I had at their age. She smiled slightly. They saved their allowance for 3 months to buy it. I offered to help, but they insisted on earning it themselves. The pride in her voice taught him another valuable lesson. His initial instinct had been to shower them with gifts, to make up for lost time with material generosity. But Victoria had given them something far more valuable, the satisfaction of achievement through effort. His own behavior began to change, not just around the twins, but in all aspects of his life. Board members noticed their CEO taking more time with decisions, considering the human impact rather than just the bottom line. His executive assistant Sarah commented on how he had started learning the names of all his employees' children. One particularly meaningful moment came during the twins' school orchestra concert. Alexander sat in the audience, watching as Marcus and Michael performed a violin duet. Their concentration, their subtle gestures to each other, their shared smile when they hit a particularly challenging passage, it all spoke of a connection he had never experienced in his own life. After the performance, he overheard a conversation between the twins and their music teacher. The school's instruments were aging, and some students couldn't afford their own. The next day, Alexander established a music education foundation, ensuring every child in the school district would have access to quality instruments and instruction. "You didn't have to do that," Victoria said when she learned of his initiative. "I know," he replied, "but seeing them support each other, watching how they share their love of music with their classmates, it made me realize some things are worth more than money." The change in Alexander became most apparent in his daily routines. The man who once spent 18 hours a day in his office now made time to watch the twins' soccer practices from a distance. He learned their schedules, their habits, their preferences, not to control or influence, but to understand. He even began attending parent-teacher conferences, sitting quietly beside Victoria as their teachers praised both boys' academic performance and collaborative spirit. The other parents didn't know who he was, and for the first time in his adult life, Alexander appreciated the anonymity. "Mr. Thompson says they help other students who struggle with math," Victoria shared after one such meeting. They noticed a classmate having trouble and created a study group during lunch breaks. The information filled Alexander with a pride different from anything he'd felt over business successes. His sons had inherited his intelligence, but had developed something he had taken decades to learn: empathy. As autumn turned to winter, Alexander's mansion began to feel emptier than ever. The spacious rooms and expensive furnishings seemed hollow compared to the warm chaos of Victoria's small house. He found himself wondering about the sound of children's laughter echoing through his marble halls, of science projects spread across his antique dining table, of two small beds where his home office now stood. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. Alexander was in the middle of a board meeting when Sarah burst into the conference room, her usual composure shattered. Victoria was on the line, her voice trembling with worry. Marcus had collapsed during soccer practice and been rushed to Boston General Hospital. Without a word to his stunned board members, Alexander left the meeting. The drive to the hospital was a blur of anxiety and helplessness. He found Victoria in the emergency waiting room, her work uniform still on, her hands clasped in prayer. "What happened?" he asked, forgetting all pretense of distance. "His heart," Victoria managed to say. "They're running tests. Michael won't leave his side." The scene in the pediatric ward broke something inside Alexander. Marcus lay in a hospital bed, looking small and vulnerable among the medical equipment. Michael sat beside him, holding his twin's hand, refusing to move even when nurses needed to check vitals. The diagnosis came late that evening, a congenital heart condition that required immediate surgical intervention. The procedure was complex and expensive, far beyond what Victoria's insurance would cover. The public hospital's waiting list for such specialized surgery was months long. "I can have him transferred to Massachusetts General," Alexander said immediately. "They have the best pediatric cardiac team in the country." Victoria's initial instinct was to refuse, but one look at Marcus's pale face changed her mind. Some battles weren't worth fighting, not when her son's health was at stake. The transfer was arranged within hours. Alexander's influence opened doors that would have remained closed to Victoria alone. Marcus was scheduled for surgery the next morning with the head of pediatric cardiology. Throughout the night, Alexander and Victoria maintained a silent vigil outside the boys' hospital room. Michael had finally fallen asleep in a chair next to his brother's bed, their hands still clasped together. "I never knew," Alexander said softly, "about the heart condition. It wasn't in any of the medical records I found." Victoria wiped away tears. "It only started showing symptoms recently. The community clinic doctor said it might be just a murmur, nothing serious. We were waiting for an appointment with a specialist." The guilt in her voice was unmistakable. She had done everything possible with her limited resources, working extra shifts to save for medical expenses, but it hadn't been enough. "This isn't your fault," Alexander assured her. "You've been everything they needed and more." "Have I?" she questioned, her voice breaking. "If I had better insurance, if I had noticed the signs earlier—" "Victoria," Alexander interrupted gently, "you've given them something I never had, unconditional love. Everything else we can fix together." The surgery lasted 6 hours. Alexander and Victoria spent that time in the waiting room, occasionally making awkward small talk, but mostly sitting in shared anxiety. Michael refused to leave, camping out in the pediatric waiting area with his schoolbooks spread around him. During those long hours, Alexander observed how the hospital staff treated Victoria with genuine warmth and respect. Several nurses stopped by to offer encouragement, mentioning how they knew the twins from their volunteer work, reading to younger patients on the pediatric floor. "They come every Saturday," Victoria explained. "Started after Michael was in here with pneumonia last year. They saw how scared the little ones were and wanted to help." The revelation hit Alexander hard. His sons, despite their own challenges, had developed a capacity for empathy that he was only beginning to understand. They weren't just academic achievers or talented musicians, they were genuinely good people. When the surgeon finally emerged, her smile brought relief to everyone. The procedure had been successful. Marcus would need careful monitoring and follow-up care, but the prognosis was excellent. Victoria broke down in tears of relief, and without thinking, Alexander put a comforting hand on her shoulder. It was the first time they had touched outside of professional interactions, and the moment carried a weight neither of them expected. Michael, who had been dozing in a chair, rushed to hear the news about his brother. His face lit up with joy, and impulsively, he hugged both Victoria and Alexander. The embrace lasted only seconds, but it marked a shift in their complicated dynamic. As they watched Marcus sleep off the anesthesia, his color already improving, Alexander made a silent vow. He would find a way to be part of their lives that didn't disrupt the beautiful family Victoria had built. The legal battles and power plays had been misguided. This, standing together in concern and hope for their child, this was what family meant. The weeks following Marcus's surgery brought subtle but significant changes to their complicated family dynamic. Alexander arranged to work remotely, setting up a temporary office in the hospital's family waiting room. He took turns with Victoria sitting with Marcus, learning the gentle art of being there without overwhelming. Michael continued his daily visits after school, always bringing his brother's favorite books and the latest class notes. The twins would work on their homework together, Marcus propped up in his hospital bed, while Michael explained what he'd missed in their advanced mathematics class. "They've always been like this," Victoria said one evening, watching the boys from the doorway. "When one struggles, the other steps up. Perfect balance." Alexander nodded, recognizing in their interaction something he'd missed in his own life, the power of unconditional support. His success had been built on competition and individual achievement, but his sons were showing him a different path. The hospital staff began to recognize him not as the powerful CEO of Morgan Enterprises, but simply as Marcus's father. The title, unofficial and unearned as it was, affected him more deeply than any business accolade ever had. During one of Marcus's physical therapy sessions, Alexander found himself alone with Michael in the hospital corridor. The boy was unusually quiet, his usual enthusiasm dampened by worry for his brother. "Your science project," Alexander ventured, remembering the wind turbine presentation. "Have you thought about entering it in the state competition?" Michael's eyes lit up briefly, before dimming again. "The entry fee is pretty high, and with Marcus's medical bills, what if I told you there's a scholarship program?" Alexander suggested carefully, "for promising young scientists." It wasn't exactly a lie. He had established the scholarship fund that morning, making sure it would be available to all students in the district. But Michael didn't need to know that detail yet. The boy's face brightened. "Really, do you think we could both apply?" Marcus did most of the mathematical calculations for the blade design. Alexander felt a surge of pride at Michael's instinctive inclusion of his brother. "I think that's exactly what the scholarship committee would want to see, collaborative innovation." As Marcus's strength returned, Alexander found himself included in more family moments. Victoria began seeking his input on medical decisions, acknowledging his research into the best treatment options. The twins would occasionally ask him questions about business and technology, their curiosity reminding him of his own childhood fascination with how things worked. One afternoon, he arrived at the hospital to find the boys engaged in an intense chess match. Marcus's moves were more calculated, while Michael played with creative flair. Their different approaches complemented each other perfectly. "Dad used to play chess," Michael mentioned casually, not looking up from the board. "Mum told us he was really good." The word dad hung in the air, its implications clear. They knew, or at least suspected, the truth about their connection to Alexander. Victoria had been honest with them in age-appropriate ways, never hiding the fact that they were conceived through fertility treatments. "Would you like to play sometime?" Alexander asked carefully, his heart racing at the possibility. Both boys looked up at him, then at each other, having one of their silent twin conversations. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Maybe when I'm better. Michael says you have a giant chess set in your garden, is that true?" Alexander smiled, remembering the oversized chess pieces he'd installed years ago but never used. "It is, and it's more fun, with more players." The invitation was subtle but clear. They were offering him a chance to be part of their world, on their terms. No legal documents or court orders could have given him what these two young boys were freely offering, an opportunity to earn their trust. Victoria watched this exchange from the doorway, her expression a mixture of concern and hope. Later, when the boys were absorbed in a card game, she pulled Alexander aside. "They're starting to ask questions," she said quietly, "about you, about their heritage. I've always been honest with them about the fertility treatment, but now—" "What do you need from me?" Alexander asked, the question marking a dramatic shift from his earlier demands and legal maneuvers. Victoria considered for a moment. "They need stability, understanding, someone who'll be there consistently, not just when it's convenient. Can you be that person, Alexander?" It was the first time. She had used his first name, and the significance wasn't lost on him. She was offering him a chance to prove himself, not as a wealthy benefactor or powerful CEO, but as someone who could contribute positively to their children's lives. As autumn painted Boston's trees in brilliant colors, Marcus's recovery progressed steadily. The hospital visits became less frequent, replaced by regular checkups and physical therapy sessions. Alexander had quietly arranged for the best cardiac rehabilitation program, but this time with Victoria's full knowledge and consent. The dynamic between them had shifted subtly during those weeks in the hospital. Their shared concern for Marcus had created a foundation of trust that neither had expected. Victoria began including Alexander in more decisions about the boys' lives, not out of obligation, but because she recognized the genuine change in him. One crisp Saturday morning, Alexander arrived at Victoria's house for what had become a weekly ritual, helping the twins with their science project. The state competition was approaching, and their wind turbine design had evolved into something remarkably sophisticated. "We improved the blade efficiency by 12%, Marcus explained, spreading calculations across the kitchen table. His enthusiasm showed no traces of his recent health scare. Michael nodded eagerly, adding, "And we're using recycled materials for the base. It's better for the environment and costs less." Alexander listened, impressed by their consideration of both practical and ethical factors. These were the kind of insights that had taken him decades to learn in business. "Have you considered how to scale this for real-world application?" he asked, genuinely curious. The twins exchanged one of their telepathic looks before Michael pulled out a folder filled with sketches. "We thought about that. What if we could install small turbines on apartment buildings? Not everyone has space for solar panels, but these could work even in urban areas." Victoria watched from the kitchen as Alexander and the boys huddled over their designs. She was preparing their traditional Saturday lunch, simple sandwiches and homemade cookies that somehow tasted better than any gourmet meal Alexander had ever had. "They're different when you're here," she admitted later, while the boys were cleaning up, more confident in their ideas. They used to hide their advanced math skills at school, worried about standing out. Now they're proud of their abilities. Alexander felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with Victoria's excellent coffee. "They're extraordinary children. You've done an amazing job raising them." "We both know they got their intelligence from you," she replied, but without the bitterness that might have colored such a statement months ago. Intelligence without empathy is worthless, Alexander said quietly. I'm living proof of that. Or at least I was. The conversation was interrupted by excited shouts from the backyard. The boys had taken their prototype outside for testing, and judging by their celebrations, something had gone right. Alexander and Victoria stepped out to find the small turbine spinning smoothly in the autumn breeze, powering an LED display they had wired themselves. The pride on the twins' faces was matched only by the joy of sharing their success with both parents. Later that afternoon, as Alexander prepared to leave, Marcus approached him with unusual hesitation. Mom said you used to build model airplanes too, when you were our age. I did, Alexander confirmed, wondering where this was leading. We're starting a new model next weekend, Michael chimed in. It's pretty complicated. Maybe you could help? The invitation, so casually offered yet so monumental in its implications, left Alexander momentarily speechless. He looked at Victoria, who gave a slight nod. I'd like that very much, he managed to say. As he drove home that evening, Alexander realized how much his definition of success had changed. His thoughts weren't on Morgan Enterprises' stock prices or the next corporate acquisition. Instead, he was mentally reviewing model airplane construction techniques and planning to dig out his old engineering notebooks from storage. His mansion's imposing facade greeted him with its usual grandeur, but for the first time, he saw it through different eyes. The perfectly manicured gardens seemed sterile compared to Victoria's small but vibrant backyard. The silent halls felt empty without the sound of children's laughter and excited discussions about scientific discoveries. Sarah had left several urgent messages about business matters on his desk. A year ago, he would have tackled them immediately, working late into the night. Now he found himself sketching ideas for the twins' wind turbine project instead, adding notes about potential improvements and safety features. The transformation in his priorities wasn't lost on those around him. His executive team had noticed how their CEO now ended meetings promptly at 5 p.m. on Saturdays, regardless of what was being discussed. The staff at his mansion commented on the appearance of physics books and engineering materials in his usually austere study. The model airplane project became a weekly tradition that transformed Alexander's previously rigid weekend routine. Each Saturday afternoon, his expensive Italian leather shoes would gather dust from Victoria's backyard as he helped the twins assemble their latest creation. The boys' enthusiasm was contagious, their natural curiosity drawing out a side of Alexander that had been dormant for decades. This part's tricky, Marcus commented one afternoon, carefully aligning a wing section. The instructions say it needs perfect balance. Michael nodded seriously. Like when we're playing violin duets. If one part's off, the whole thing doesn't work right. Alexander watched in amazement as the twins worked in perfect synchronization, each anticipating the other's needs without a word being spoken. It was a dance of cooperation he had never experienced in his own childhood, where competition and individual achievement had been the only measures of success. Victoria brought out lemonade and watched from the porch, her expression thoughtful. The scene before her was one she had never imagined possible. The powerful CEO of Morgan Enterprises, his expensive suit jacket draped over a garden chair, patiently helping their sons perfect their project. "You're different with them," she observed when Alexander joined her for a break. "More human." He considered her words carefully. "They make it easy. They don't care about my net worth or corporate influence. They just want to know if I can help them figure out why their propeller isn't spinning correctly." The conversation was interrupted by excited calls from the boys. They had finally achieved the perfect balance, and their model plane was ready for its first test flight. Alexander found himself holding his breath alongside Victoria as the twins launched their creation into the autumn sky. The plane soared beautifully, executing a perfect loop before landing softly in the grass. The boys' triumphant cheers echoed through the neighborhood, and Alexander felt an unfamiliar sensation in his chest, pure, uncomplicated joy. Later that evening, as they cleaned up the workspace, Marcus asked a question that caught Alexander off guard. "Mom says you build big buildings, not just models. Is that true?" "My company does, yes," Alexander replied carefully. But do you design them yourself? Michael pressed, his eyes curious. Like we design our models? The question made Alexander pause. When was the last time he had actually created something himself, rather than just overseeing others' work? The twins' innocent inquiry forced him to confront how far he had strayed from his original passion for engineering and innovation. Not anymore, he admitted, but I used to. Would you like to see some of my old designs? The boys' enthusiastic response led to an impromptu show-and-tell session in Victoria's living room. Alexander retrieved his old engineering notebooks from his car. He had started carrying them just in case. And soon the coffee table was covered with sketches and calculations from his early career. Victoria brought out hot chocolate, her special recipe that even Alexander's private chef couldn't replicate, and watched as her sons absorbed every detail of their father's early work. The parallels between their thought processes and his were striking, but there was something extra in the twins' approach, a consideration for how their innovations could help others. What if we combined our wind turbine idea with your building designs? Marcus suggested suddenly, his eyes bright with inspiration. We could make whole buildings that generate their own power. Michael immediately grabbed a pencil and paper, adding to his brother's thought. And use the energy to help people who can't afford electricity. Alexander felt something shift inside him as he watched them build on his old designs with their fresh, empathetic perspective. These boys weren't just inheriting his intelligence or engineering aptitude. They were showing him how those gifts could be used for more than just profit. Your sons, he said quietly to Victoria, while the twins were engrossed in their new concept. They have something I never did at their age. They see beyond the technical challenge to the human impact. Victoria smiled softly. They've grown up understanding the value of helping others. When you have less, you appreciate more what sharing means. The evening ended with plans for next weekend's project, an ambitious combination of their wind turbine concept and one of Alexander's early building designs. As he prepared to leave, both boys hugged him spontaneously, a gesture that still caught him by surprise every time it happened. Driving home, Alexander realized that these Saturday sessions were teaching him far more than he was teaching the twins. In their young minds, success wasn't measured in dollars or square footage, but in the potential to make a positive difference in the world. The Massachusetts State Science Fair buzzed with excitement as hundreds of young innovators presented their projects. In the midst of the controlled chaos, Marcus and Michael stood proudly beside their enhanced wind turbine display, now featuring elements of sustainable urban architecture, inspired by their sessions with Alexander. Victoria adjusted Marcus's a concession to the formal nature of the event, while trying to calm her own nerves. Alexander stood nearby, maintaining a respectful distance but close enough to offer support if needed. His presence at such events had become natural over the past months, no longer causing whispers or raised eyebrows among the other parents. Remember, Marcus was telling his brother, if they ask about the energy distribution calculations. I've got it, Michael finished with a confident smile, and you'll handle the questions about material sustainability. Their project had evolved far beyond its original scope. The twins had incorporated Alexander's architectural knowledge with their own innovative ideas about renewable energy, creating a comprehensive proposal for sustainable urban housing that could benefit low-income communities. The judges moved methodically through the exhibition hall, spending extra time at certain displays. When they reached the twin station, both boys straightened unconsciously, channeling their nervousness into focused energy. Talk us through your project, the lead judge requested, adjusting her glasses as she studied their display. What followed was a presentation that left both Victoria and Alexander in awe. The twins took turns explaining different aspects of their work, seamlessly building on each other's points. They addressed complex engineering concepts with remarkable clarity, their passion for the subject evident in every word. And what inspired this focus on affordable housing? Another judge asked. Michael glanced at his mother before answering. We live in a neighborhood where lots of families struggle with energy bills. We wanted to find a way to help. Marcus added, the technology exists to make buildings more efficient, but it's usually only used in expensive developments. We think everyone deserves access to sustainable solutions." Alexander felt his chest tighten with pride. These were his sons, combining his technical aptitude with something he had taken decades to learn: social responsibility. Victoria's influence was clear in their genuine desire to help others. The judges spent nearly twice their allocated time at the twins' display, asking detailed questions about everything from the technical specifications to the potential social impact. Other students and parents gathered around, drawn by the boys' enthusiastic explanations. During a break in the judging, Alexander overheard a conversation between Marcus and a young girl from another school who was struggling with her own project's mechanical component. Without hesitation, Marcus offered suggestions, drawing diagrams to help her understand the concepts better. "He gets that from you," Victoria said quietly, appearing at Alexander's side. "The ability to explain complex ideas simply." Alexander shook his head. "No, that kindness, that instinct to help, that's all you." The awards ceremony was held in the university's grand auditorium. Victoria sat between Alexander and the twins, all of them trying to contain their nervous energy. As the Junior Division Awards were announced, Michael grabbed his brother's hand, their usual gesture of mutual support. The first place award in the Engineering and Sustainability category goes to... The announcer paused for dramatic effect. Marcus and Michael Henderson for their integrated urban wind energy system. The twins leapt to their feet, their excitement barely contained by the formal setting. As they made their way to the stage, Alexander noticed something remarkable. They were supporting each other up the stairs, Marcus still careful with his recovery, Michael ensuring his brother didn't overexert himself. Victoria wiped tears from her eyes as she watched their sons accept the award. Alexander found himself reaching over to squeeze her hand supportively, a gesture that would have been unthinkable months ago. The boys' acceptance speech was brief, but powerful. They thanked their mother for her unwavering support, their teachers for encouraging their curiosity, and then, to Alexander's surprise, they thanked Mr. Morgan for showing us how. Engineering can build bridges, not just buildings. The metaphor wasn't lost on anyone who knew their story. Alexander felt moisture in his eyes for the first time in years, touched by their public acknowledgement of his role in their lives, however, carefully phrased. After the ceremony, as families and friends gathered for photographs, the twins insisted on a picture with both Victoria and Alexander. Standing there with one boy on either side of him, Alexander realized that all his previous achievements, the buildings, the acquisitions, the billions in his bank account, paled in comparison to this moment. A reporter from the local paper approached, interested in featuring the twins' project in a story about young innovators. Alexander instinctively stepped back, letting Victoria handle the interview arrangements. He watched as she proudly discussed their work, noting how she emphasized their commitment to community benefit over technical innovation. The success at the science fair catalyzed subtle but significant changes in their family dynamic. The twins' project had drawn attention not just from judges and journalists, but from engineering firms interested in developing their concepts further. Alexander found himself in an unusual position, watching from the sidelines as his sons navigated their first taste of recognition. One morning, as Alexander sat in his office overlooking Boston's skyline, Sarah brought him the latest press coverage of the twins' achievement. The article praised not just their technical innovation, but their focus on social impact. It was the kind of publicity that couldn't be bought with all his wealth. Genuine admiration for two young minds working to make the world better. "The board meeting is in 10 minutes, Sarah reminded him gently, noting his distraction. "Thank you, Sarah," he replied, but his attention remained on the article. There was a photo of the twins with their project, their expressions bright with enthusiasm. The caption mentioned their dedication to affordable housing solutions, but made no connection to the Morgan business empire. The board meeting that followed marked a turning point in Alexander's corporate leadership. Instead of focusing solely on profit margins and market expansion, he found himself introducing a new vision for Morgan Enterprises. "Our next major development project," he announced to his surprised executives, will be a pilot program for sustainable, affordable housing. We'll be incorporating innovative energy solutions, including some remarkably efficient wind power integration. The board members exchanged glances. This was a dramatic departure from their usual luxury development projects. The profit margins on affordable housing are significantly lower, one director pointed out. Alexander smiled, thinking of his son's presentation. The returns we should be measuring aren't just financial. Our company has the resources to make a real difference in communities that need it most. The transformation in Alexander Morgan became a topic of discussion in Boston's business circles. The ruthless CEO, known for hostile takeovers and aggressive expansion, was suddenly championing sustainable development and community investment. Back at Victoria's house, life continued in its simple, meaningful way. The twins' science fair trophy sat on a shelf alongside their violin competition certificates and chess club awards. Alexander noticed how Victoria had created a home where achievement was celebrated, but never at the expense of compassion. "We got another letter from the Engineering Institute," Michael announced during one of their Saturday project sessions. "They want to know if we'll present our design at their youth conference." Marcus looked up from the prototype they were refining. "Mom, do you think we could go? It's in Chicago, but..." Victoria hesitated, practical concerns about travel costs clearly on her mind. Alexander stayed quiet, waiting for her to respond. "We'll figure something out," she said finally, her determination to support their dreams evident in her voice. Later, while the boys were occupied with their work, Alexander approached Victoria in the kitchen. "Let me help with the Chicago trip," he said quietly. "Not as a power play or to show off wealth, but because they've earned this opportunity." Victoria studied him for a long moment. The man standing in her modest kitchen was very different from the imposing figure who had appeared at her door months ago. "They have earned it," she agreed finally. "But we do this responsibly. Commercial flights, reasonable hotel." Alexander nodded, understanding that this wasn't just about money. It was about teaching the boys values that no fortune could buy. The Fedor twins' influence began extending beyond their immediate family. At school, they started a science club focused on environmental solutions. Their enthusiasm was contagious, drawing in other students who might never have considered engineering as a path. "Your son's club is having quite an impact," their principal told Victoria during a parent meeting. "We've seen increased interest in our STEM programs, especially among students from disadvantaged backgrounds." Alexander, who had started attending these meetings as well, felt a peculiar pride in this accomplishment. His own influence had always been measured in market shares and dollar signs. The twins were creating change through inspiration and inclusion. One evening, as Alexander prepared to leave after their weekly project session, Marcus asked him a question that stopped him in his tracks. "The buildings your company makes," the boy began thoughtfully, "could they be more like our designs? You know, helping people who need homes?" Michael joined in. "We've been thinking about ways to make it work. The initial costs might be higher, but the long-term benefits." Alexander looked at his sons, seeing in them the idealism he had lost somewhere along his climb to success. "Actually," he smiled, "I'd love to hear your ideas about that." The Chicago Youth Engineering Conference venue sparkled with possibility as young innovators from across the country gathered to share their ideas. Marcus and Michael stood backstage, reviewing their presentation notes one final time. Their project had evolved significantly since the science fair, incorporating feedback from professional engineers and their own continued research. Victoria adjusted Michael's collar, her hands trembling slightly with nervous excitement. She was wearing her best dress, simple but elegant, purchased specially for this occasion. Alexander stood nearby, carrying himself with less of his usual corporate rigidity, having learned to blend in at these family events. "Remember," Marcus whispered to his brother, "if I get nervous about my heart, I'll take over the technical section," Michael finished, "and you'll handle the social impact portion when I start talking too fast." Their synchronization had only grown stronger since Marcus's recovery. The health scare had somehow deepened their already remarkable connection, making them even more attuned to each other's strengths and vulnerabilities. The conference hall was filled with industry professionals, academics, and young scientists. The twins' presentation was scheduled as part of a special session on next-generation innovators. As they waited for their turn, Alexander noticed something that touched him deeply. The boys were wearing matching blue ties, the same shade as the one he had worn in his first professional presentation decades ago. "Mom helped us pick them," Michael explained, catching his glance. "She said blue represents trust and stability." Victoria smiled softly. The store clerk suggested red, more powerful, she said, but the boys insisted on blue. When their names were called, Marcus and Michael took the stage with a confidence that belied their age. Their presentation had evolved into something extraordinary, a comprehensive vision for transforming urban housing through sustainable technology and community-centered design. "Our initial prototype focused on wind energy integration," Marcus began, his voice clear and steady. "But we've expanded the concept to include solar collection, rainwater harvesting, and community green spaces." Michael stepped forward, pulling up detailed schematics on the screen. "The key innovation isn't just the technology, it's making it accessible to communities that need it most." The audience leaned forward, engaged by their passionate presentation. These weren't just two kids with a science project, they were young visionaries presenting a viable solution to real-world problems. During the question and answer session, a distinguished engineer raised his hand. "Your design could be more profitable if targeted at luxury developments. Why focus on affordable housing?" The twins exchanged a quick glance before Marcus answered. "Because innovation should help everyone, not just those who can afford it." "Our mom taught us that true success means lifting others up," Michael added, his voice firm with conviction. Victoria felt tears welling up in her eyes. Alexander, sitting beside her, quietly offered his handkerchief, a simple gesture that spoke volumes about how their relationship had evolved. The presentation earned a standing ovation. As industry professionals crowded around to discuss the project further, Alexander watched with pride as his sons handled technical questions with ease while never losing sight of their project's core purpose, helping others. That evening, the family celebrated at a modest Italian restaurant, the twins' choice over the upscale venues Alexander had suggested. Over pasta and garlic bread, they discussed the day's events and the numerous business cards they had collected from interested engineers. "Several companies expressed interest in developing your concepts," Alexander mentioned, careful to maintain a neutral tone, including Morgan Enterprises, of course. The boys shared one of their telepathic looks before Marcus spoke. "We've been thinking about that. What if we created a foundation instead? Something that would share the technology freely with communities that need it." "Like open source software," Michael added excitedly, "so anyone could use and improve the designs." Alexander felt a familiar urge to speak about market dynamics and profit potential, but he caught Victoria's eye and stopped himself. His sons were teaching him a different way of measuring success. Later, while the twins were engrossed in dessert, Victoria turned to Alexander. "They're changing how people think about innovation," she said softly. "Not just the technology, but the purpose behind it." "They're changing how I think about everything," Alexander admitted. "Business, success, legacy, none of it means what I thought it did 6 months ago." The Chicago skyline glittered through the restaurant window, its magnificent buildings standing as testament to architectural and engineering achievement. But now Alexander saw them differently, not as monuments to wealth and power, but as opportunities to create positive change in people's lives. The success in Chicago catalyzed a transformation that rippled through both family and business. Back in Boston, Alexander called an emergency board meeting at Morgan Enterprises. The conference room, with its mahogany table and leather chairs, seemed oddly ostentatious now, a reminder of priorities he no longer fully embraced. "We're establishing a new division," he announced to his assembled executives, "the Morgan Foundation for Sustainable Innovation. Its primary mission will be developing and implementing affordable housing solutions using green technology." The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was more than a corporate initiative. It was a fundamental shift in company philosophy. The foundation will operate on an open-source model, Alexander continued, thinking of his son's vision. All technological developments will be freely shared with communities and organizations working on affordable housing projects. But the profit potential, one director began, will be measured in social impact as well as financial returns, Alexander finished firmly. It's time for Morgan Enterprises to redefine success. Meanwhile, at their local middle school, the twins were creating their own kind of revolution. Their science club had grown from a handful of students to dozens, with a waiting list for new members. They had started mentoring younger children, sharing their enthusiasm for science and engineering with a new generation. "You should see them with the elementary school kids," their science teacher told Victoria during a parent conference. "They have this gift for making complex concepts understandable, and they never make anyone feel inferior for asking questions." Victoria watched through the classroom window as her sons helped a group of younger students build simple wind turbines from recycled materials. The project wasn't just about teaching engineering, it was about showing children from all backgrounds that they could be innovators. Alexander, who had started attending these conferences alongside Victoria, felt a deep sense of pride in how the twins were using their knowledge. They had inherited his analytical mind, but combined it with something he had only recently begun to understand: the joy of using that intelligence to help others. One Saturday afternoon, as the family worked on their latest project in Victoria's backyard, an unexpected visitor arrived. Sarah, Alexander's assistant, appeared with an urgent matter requiring his attention. A potential major investor was threatening to pull out of Morgan Enterprises over the new foundation initiative. Before Alexander could respond, Marcus spoke up. "Is helping people really bad for business?" "Some people think making money is the only kind of success," Michael added, wise beyond his years. Alexander looked at his sons, then at Victoria, who had created such thoughtful, empathetic children. Finally, he turned to Sarah. "Tell the investor I'll call them on Monday. Today is for family." Sarah's surprise was evident, but she nodded and left. The Alexander Morgan of 6 months ago would have rushed to handle any threat to his business. Empire. Now he understood there were more important things than stock prices and investor satisfaction. That evening, as they cleaned up their project materials, Victoria found Alexander standing in her small garden, looking thoughtful. "Penny, for your thoughts?" she asked, handing him a cup of her homemade coffee. "I was just thinking about success," he replied. "I spent decades building towers of glass and steel, thinking they were monuments to achievement. But the twins, they're building something far more valuable." Victoria nodded, understanding. "They're building bridges between people, between privileged and underprivileged communities, between knowledge and need." "They get that from you," Alexander said softly. "You taught them that true wealth isn't about money." The conversation was interrupted by excited calls from inside. The twins had found something in their research that they couldn't wait to share. As Alexander and Victoria headed back inside, they exchanged a glance of shared pride and amazement at the young men their sons were becoming. The boys had spread their latest designs across the kitchen table. They were working on an adaptation of their sustainable housing concept for emergency shelters, temporary housing that could be quickly deployed while maintaining energy efficiency and dignity for displaced families. "We were thinking," Marcus began, his eyes bright with enthusiasm, "what if the Morgan Foundation could help implement these in disaster areas?" Michael jumped in. "The designs would be free for any organization to use, and we could help train local communities to build and maintain them." Alexander sat down at the table, pulling his old engineering notebook from his briefcase. "Let's work on this together," he said, opening to a fresh page. "I think I know some people who could help make this happen." As October approached, Victoria found herself facing an unexpected dilemma. The twins' 8th birthday was coming up, and for the first time Alexander was part of the planning discussions. Their traditional celebration had always been simple: homemade chocolate cake, a few close friends, and modest presents carefully saved for throughout the year. They've never had a big party, Victoria explained during one of their now regular evening conversations, but they've never complained. They understand our circumstances. Alexander nodded, thinking of his own elaborate but lonely childhood celebrations. What if we did something different this year? Not extravagant, but meaningful. The suggestion led to lengthy discussions about finding the right balance. Alexander had to resist his instinct to overcompensate with grandeur, while Victoria worked to overcome her pride and accept his desire to contribute. The solution came from an unexpected source, the twins themselves. During one of their weekend project sessions, Marcus mentioned a documentary they'd watched about a community center that needed renovation. They have this great science program, Michael explained enthusiastically, but their equipment is really old, and their building needs better insulation, Marcus added. They're spending too much on heating bills. Victoria and Alexander exchanged glances, an idea forming between them. The perfect birthday celebration began to take shape, one that would combine the boys' love of science with their growing desire to help others. The day of the party arrived crisp and clear. The twins were surprised when their mother drove past their usual party venue, the local pizza place, and headed toward the community center. "Are we picking someone up?" Marcus asked, curious. Victoria smiled mysteriously. "You'll see." When they arrived, the parking lot was full of familiar cars. Their school friends were there, along with their science club members, and even some of the younger students they had been mentoring. But the real surprise waited inside. The community center's main hall had been transformed into an interactive science fair. Various stations were set up with new equipment, microscopes, robotics kits, renewable energy demonstrations, and a sophisticated computer lab. "Happy birthday!" everyone shouted as the twins entered. The boys stood speechless, taking in the scene. Their eyes went from the new equipment to the familiar faces, to Alexander and Victoria standing together, both beaming with pride. "The A. Morgan Foundation," Alexander explained, careful to maintain a professional tone despite his emotion, "has partnered with the community center to establish a permanent STEM education program. And," he added with a smile, "they're looking for 2 experienced young mentors to help run it." The twins' faces lit up with understanding. This wasn't just a birthday party, it was an opportunity to expand their impact, to share their love of science with more children who might not otherwise have access to such resources. "We've already had 40 children sign up for the after-school program," the community center director added. "They're excited to learn from the famous Henderson twins." Victoria watched as her sons explored the new facilities, their excitement tempered by a sense of responsibility. They weren't just receiving gifts, they were being given a chance to give back. The celebration that followed was unlike any birthday party the community center had seen. Instead of traditional party games, the twins led demonstrations at different stations, their natural teaching abilities shining through as they helped younger children understand basic scientific principles. The cake, still homemade by Victoria, was decorated with molecular structures and mathematical formulas, a perfect blend of tradition and their scientific passions. As everyone sang "Happy Birthday," Alexander noticed how the twins held hands, sharing this moment as they shared everything else. Later, as the party wound down, Marcus and Michael found a quiet moment with both their parents. "This is the best birthday ever," Marcus said softly. "Not because of the equipment," Michael added quickly, "but because we can help other kids learn." Victoria felt tears welling up in her eyes. "You've always understood what matters most." Alexander, watching his sons interact with their mother, realized how much he had learned from them. His own birthday celebrations as a child had been exercises in extravagance, designed to impress rather than connect. "We were thinking," Marcus began, sharing a quick look with his brother. "Could we use the foundation's name for the program?" Michael finished. "It might help other companies support similar projects in different neighborhoods." Alexander felt a surge of pride, not in his wealth or influence, but in the wisdom and compassion of his sons. They understood instinctively what had taken him a lifetime to learn, that true legacy isn't built on money, but on positive impact in others' lives. The success of the community center's STEM program exceeded everyone's expectations. Within months it had become a model for similar initiatives across Boston. The twins' involvement went far beyond their initial role as mentors. They had become the heart of a growing movement to make science education accessible to all children. One crisp autumn morning, Alexander arrived at the center to find Marcus, and Michael deeply engaged in helping a group of students build their own wind turbines, using the same design principles that had started their own journey. "See how the angle affects the rotation?" Marcus was explaining to a young girl whose eyes shone with understanding. "Just like your first design," Alexander commented, making his presence known. The twins looked up and smiled, no longer surprised by his regular visits. These days, the CEO of Morgan Enterprises was as likely to be found helping children with science projects as attending board meetings. "We've improved it," Michael explained eagerly. "Made it simpler to build with basic materials so more people can make them at home." Victoria, who had taken on a part-time role coordinating the center's programs, watched from her small office. The sight of Alexander in his expensive suit, kneeling beside a table of excited children, still seemed surreal sometimes. Later, that afternoon during a quiet moment, she found him studying the wall of photos that documented the program's growth. Among the pictures was one from the twins' birth, two tiny babies in the hospital, unaware that their existence would catalyze such profound changes. "I never thanked you," Alexander said softly as she approached. "For what?" "For protecting them, for raising them to be who they are." He gestured to where the twins were now helping clean up after the day's activities, making sure to include even the youngest children in the task. "I would have given them everything, and in doing so, might have prevented them from becoming these extraordinary people." Victoria considered his words. "They needed both perspectives, I think. My understanding of value and your vision of possibility. Together, they've created something neither of us could have imagined." The conversation was interrupted by excited voices from the computer lab. The twins had been working on a special project, a website that would share their sustainable housing designs and educational resources with community centers worldwide. "We thought about what you said," Marcus explained as their parents entered the room. "About open source technology," Michael nodded enthusiastically. "So we're creating a platform where people can download our designs, modify them for their local needs, and share their improvements." Alexander moved closer to examine their work, noting how they had incorporated sophisticated engineering concepts while maintaining user-friendly interfaces. These were his sons, unquestionably. The same analytical minds, the same drive for excellence, but tempered by something he had only recently begun to understand: the joy of using those gifts to help others. The Morgan Foundation could help scale this, he suggested carefully, always mindful now of overstepping. "Make it available to more communities." The twins shared one of their telepathic looks before Marcus spoke. "Actually, we were hoping you'd say that. We have some ideas about creating a network of community innovation centers." Victoria watched as father and sons bent over the computer, discussing possibilities and improvements. The scene struck her as powerfully symbolic, Alexander's business acumen merging with the twins' idealistic vision, creating something greater than either approach could achieve alone. "Mom," Michael called, noticing her standing apart. "We need your input too. You understand the community better than anyone." As she joined them at the computer, Victoria realized how far they had all come. The rigid boundaries between their worlds had dissolved, replaced by a shared vision of what was possible when different perspectives worked together. The website project became another bridge between Alexander's corporate world and the twins. Community focus. Board members who had initially resisted the foundation's direction couldn't argue with the positive publicity and goodwill it generated. More importantly, it was producing tangible results: improved access to STEM education, sustainable housing initiatives, and a growing network of communities sharing resources and knowledge. As December painted Boston in white, the community center buzzed with holiday preparations. The twins had organized a special winter science fair, combining seasonal themes with their ongoing environmental projects. Paper snowflakes made with mathematical precision hung alongside displays about thermal efficiency and sustainable heating solutions. Victoria stood in the doorway of the main hall, watching as Marcus and Michael helped younger students prepare their presentations. The past year had brought changes she could never have imagined when she first opened her door to find Alexander Morgan standing there. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Alexander's voice came from behind her, carrying 2 cups of her favorite coffee. A small tradition they had developed during their increasingly frequent conversations about the twins. "Just thinking about how much has changed," she replied, accepting the coffee. "A year ago I was worried about making ends meet. Now we're watching our sons change their community," Alexander finished, his voice soft with pride. The hour no longer felt strange. They had found their rhythm as parents, each contributing their unique perspectives to the twins' development. Victoria's grounding influence balanced Alexander's expansive vision, creating a foundation that allowed the boys to flourish while staying true to their values. Inside the hall, Marcus was explaining the principles of heat transfer to a group of fascinated 6th graders, using a model he and Michael had built. His health scare from earlier in the year had left no lasting effects, thanks to the excellent medical care and his brother's unwavering support. "We should tell them soon," Victoria said quietly, glancing at Alexander. He nodded, understanding her reference. After months of careful discussion, they had made a decision about the twins' future, one that would require all of their combined wisdom to implement properly. The moment presented itself later that evening, after the science. Fair wound down, the family gathered in Victoria's living room, where a modest Christmas tree twinkled with handmade ornaments, many featuring scientific themes the boys had created over the years. "We have something to discuss with you," Victoria began, sharing a glance with Alexander. The twins sat up straighter, their intuitive connection buzzing with anticipation. "Your mother and I have been talking," Alexander continued, careful to maintain the delicate balance they had achieved, "about making some changes, if you're comfortable with them." Marcus and Michael exchanged their trademark telepathic look before focusing intently on their parents. "The Morgan Foundation is expanding its educational initiatives," Alexander explained. "We're converting part of the company's main building into a large-scale innovation center with laboratories, teaching spaces, and research facilities." "Like the community center?" Michael asked, his eyes brightening with interest. "Similar, but bigger," Victoria added, "with resources to help more communities implement sustainable housing and energy solutions." "And," Alexander continued, his voice softening, "we'd like to put both your names on it, not as a publicity move, but because your vision inspired." "Taise." The twins sat in stunned silence, processing this information. Their work, their ideas about making technology accessible to everyone, had influenced one of Boston's largest corporations. "But," Marcus began hesitantly, "what about our current programs? The kids we're working with now?" Victoria smiled proudly at their immediate concern for others. "The community center programs will continue and expand. This is about reaching more people, not leaving anyone behind." "There's something else," Alexander added, glancing at Victoria for confirmation. "We'd like to renovate the east wing of my house, create a space where you could stay sometimes, only if you want to, and only when you're ready." The proposal hung in the air heavy with meaning. It wasn't about luxury or privilege, it was about family, about creating a bridge between their 2 worlds that honored both. "Would we still live here too?" Michael asked, looking around at the familiar walls of their home. "Of course," Victoria assured them quickly. "This will always be your home. We're just expanding our definition of family." The twins absorbed this, their expressions thoughtful. They had inherited Alexander's analytical mind and Victoria's emotional intelligence, allowing them to see the complexity and opportunity in this situation. "Could we use the new space for weekend science workshops?" Marcus suggested suddenly, "for kids who can't make it to the community center. And maybe start a mentorship program?" Michael added excitedly, "connecting kids from different neighborhoods?" Alexander felt his throat tighten with emotion. These were his sons, unquestionably, taking every advantage offered to them and immediately thinking about how to use it to help others. The spring sunshine streamed through the windows of the newly renovated Morgan Innovation Center, illuminating a space that perfectly bridged two worlds. Modern laboratories and research facilities shared space with comfortable community areas designed to make everyone feel welcome. The twins' influence was evident in every detail, from the sustainable energy systems to the inclusive layout that encouraged collaboration across social boundaries. Victoria stood in the main atrium, watching as students from various neighborhoods filtered in for the center's inaugural program. Her simple dress and warm smile put parents at ease, while Alexander's presence reassured donors and community leaders that this was a serious educational initiative. The twins had insisted on starting the day with a special presentation, not about technology or engineering, but about the power of family and community. They stood together at the podium, their confidence tempered by the humility Victoria had instilled in them. "A year ago," Marcus began, "we thought success meant building the best project or winning the most competitions. But we learned something more important," Michael continued. "We learned that true innovation isn't just about creating new things, it's about bringing people together." Alexander, standing at the back of the room, felt his chest tighten with pride. These weren't just his biological sons. They were remarkable young men who had taught him more about success than all his years in business. The presentation continued, with the twins introducing their expanded sustainable housing initiative. The project that had started as a science fair entry had evolved into a comprehensive program for community development, combining Alexander's business acumen with Victoria's understanding of real community needs. "The designs are free for any community to use," Marcus explained to the assembled crowd. "Because everyone deserves a safe, sustainable home," Michael added, his voice carrying the conviction that had become their trademark. After the presentation, as families explored the new facility, Alexander found Victoria watching the twins give tours to younger children. They moved seamlessly between explaining complex engineering concepts and making their visitors feel welcomed and valued. "They've created something extraordinary," he said softly. Victoria nodded. "They've created a family, not just for themselves, but for everyone who comes here." The truth of her words was evident in every corner of the center. The rigid boundaries between social classes, between corporate wealth and community needs, between parent and child, had dissolved into something more meaningful, a shared vision of what was possible when people worked together. Later that evening, the family gathered in Victoria's living room, maintaining their tradition of simple, meaningful celebrations. The twins were excitedly discussing plans for the center's upcoming programs while sharing a plate of Victoria's homemade cookies. "We were thinking," Marcus began, sharing a glance with his brother, "about starting a scholarship program," Michael finished, "using some of our competition prize money." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Your own money? You've been saving that for college." The twins shared another of their telepathic looks before Marcus spoke. "We learned from Mum that sometimes the best investments aren't about money." "And from you," Michael added, looking at Alexander. "That real success means using what you have to help others succeed too." Victoria felt tears welling up in her eyes as she watched her sons, their compassion, their intelligence, their ability to bridge worlds that had once seemed impossibly far apart. They had inherited the best of both their parents while creating something entirely their own. Alexander reached over and squeezed her hand gently, a gesture that had become natural over the months of shared parenting. They had found their own bridge, built not on legal agreements or social obligations, but on their shared love for these remarkable boys. The twins continued discussing their plans, their voices animated with possibility. The model airplane still hung from the ceiling, now joined by prototype designs for their latest projects. On the walls, family photos mixed with award certificates and newspaper clippings about their achievements. This modest living room, with its worn furniture and warmth, remained the heart of their expanding family. It was where Alexander had first seen his sons, where they had built their first projects together, where they had learned that true wealth couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. As the evening drew to a close, Marcus and Michael hugged both. Their parents' goodnight, a simple gesture